Hello, children's lit students. In this video, we're going to talk briefly about the value of picture books and also some considerations of how to look at them, specifically its art style and design. So let's check it out. And of course, please follow along with our PowerPoint. So, children's picture books is how we kick off our term. And some of the values of picture books are going to be informed by our two scholars for this lesson, which are Perry Nodelman from the book Pleasures of Children's Literature and Molly Bang from Picture This. So, of course, there have been studies that show that the more we speak to our kids and read to them, we help them to develop cognitively. And it's been proven that by reading to them helps them to build vocab and storytelling skills and having um, images with text helps them to develop cognitively. And not only that, but the fact that literature has this universal aspect, they're able to identify their own experiences and others, and even developing things such as empathy, and it sparks curiosity and creative thinking. I know me, I was a PBS kid and I grew up with educational TV. And for me, it was a TV show called Reading Rainbow that really sparked a lot of my curiosity for reading and just PBS knowledge in general. So here's some things to consider as well. So as the child is developing, uh, and little by little, the goal being reaching more and more autonomy as they develop and being able to just grow as a person. So, of course, we consider things that picture books also encourages things like independent thought and decision making, and basically strides towards autonomy. So, some of the values for picture books are those. And of course, once again, returning to the whole universal aspect of literature, children are able to see themselves and their families and their culture, right, represented in stories, and it helps them feel self-esteem and belonging too. Not only that, but the neat thing about books is that um, just like it does with us, children are introduced to different people and places and ways of life. Once again, building empathy, that's very important. And I like to think of it like a book is like traveling somewhere. We learn so much about a new culture and more about our human nature too. Additionally, too, one of the values of picture books is that it transmits important values like kindness and fairness and respect, thus helping children understand social norms and ethics. So, not only are they developing linguistically, cognitively, but also as humans, right? Uh, and of course, the more we read to them and the more we read helps with the critical thinking through looking at how the art works with the story and what can we take away from the picture book, right? As well as the fact that picture books have varied cultures, right? And helps to understand diverse perspectives. And once again, the whole empathy development part of it, as the kids are able to connect with the experiences of the characters, they're able to thus develop more empathy by that whole idea of putting themselves in another's shoes, right? And so that's very important to know that there's a lot of values for books, in this case, picture books, right? As tools for personal and social development. And once again, there's that whole thing that we remember that picture books celebrate development and strides towards autonomy, right? And once again, empathy being huge. And we see this all across literature, right? It helps to develop empathy because it places us in the shoes of people from different backgrounds, right? So, when looking at picture books, so the actual analysis aspect of it, some things to consider when we look at things like illustration, consider, well, first, where is our eye drawn first? Do the illustrations feel cohesive, like a holistic system, right? Or what about, is there a lot of too much white space, or does it feel crowded or open? Does that affect mood? And that's one thing to consider. Like when we're reading literature, writers have diction, which is word choice, and that's how they're able to create these moods. But what's cool about picture books is that it works in conjunction with the illustrators and with art. So, considering things like that, like the placement of the art, of the illustrations, as well as line and texture. So we consider, are the lines straight, jagged, or curved? So even things like lines have an effect upon the mood. So things like, sharp edges have a more hostile one, and versus rounded edges is more calming, right? Consider too size of the images and the colors and placements, and how that works in conjunction with the overall message and theme of the story, right? So this is really neat. Remember how we said that we were going to have these two scholars informing our lesson on how to look at design and art and picture books. So here's our first one, Perry Nodelman, and here's some of the principles from Nodelman. Number one, we learn that. Oh, apologies there. We learn that things like a square shape in the illustrations, they translate to rigidity and strength, right? Round shapes, gentleness and accommodation. Characters inside boxes may appear oppressed. So, why this is important is because a little preview, surprise, surprise, for our first essay, we're actually going to be looking at a picture book. We're going to be analyzing it. So, you can revisit this PowerPoint and this video. So another thing too, we consider like where our eye is drawn to. So the actual composition. Of course, we naturally read from left to right. So the main characters are often on the lower left since our eye is going there, right? Even things like heavier objects at the top can create discomfort. That's interesting. Because, um, we're reading images, left to right and top to bottom. And it's interesting how this scholar was able to consider even things like that, the location and composition and lines and as we're going to see, size and color, right? Things too, like point of view and lines. Something, I took a cinema class in college, and I remember taking away how lines make us feel a certain way. A lot of times, um, I learned how, like in cinema, like a horizontal line, things were calm, things were at peace. In cinema too, diagonal lines, things were uneasy and there was tension. So that happens similarly with picture books. But sometimes too, diagonal lines can act as arrows or like leading our attention towards a certain figure or object, right? Or character. Another thing too, um, if a character, if we're like forced to look up at it, and that shows like vulnerability. It has power and vulnerability, so consider that too. Of course, size too, like the power dynamic. If one character or image is, that much bigger, like I know sometimes in picture books, maybe the theme is about like, fear and facing fear, and the big scary thing can appear massive in scale compared to the character, because contrasts, right, help to highlight these ideas too. Things like big scale versus something small. So that's showing things too like color. We consider how color and color palette is intentional with recognizing relationships, right? And mood. So, a little bit, just like what a lot like with cinema, when lines are horizontal, it shows calm and stability. Something like a vertical shape, if there's like a vertical shape, it's energy and aspiration. And just like cinema, diagonal shapes, motion or tension. I'm actually think it's cool how there's a lot of parallels between the composition and the illustrations in cinema, right? That's pretty neat. And then what we were talking about, how a pointed shape or pointed lines can be threatening and rounded shapes comforting. And this is too another thing too, like we consider the layout. The top half, things like freedom and happiness. And this is from our other scholar, Molly Bang, about composition, right? Um, So consider these things, like what's at the center is the focal point. And I think this is interesting. And this is actually going to help when doing your own analysis of your picture book. So consider this. Of course, when there's light in the background, there's light, things feel safe, and darker backgrounds evoke uncertainty, just like in real life, right? Darker places evoke uncertainty in general. And once again, we're talking about scale. Larger objects is feeling stronger, and smaller ones is weaker. So, if we look at this image, for example, it has a bright color palette, right? So color palettes, once again, reflect a particular mood. And as you're going to be looking at your illustrations in the book you're going to choose, consider that. How does the color palette of the illustrations work in conjunction with the overall mood and theme, right? So what type of mood would you imagine here in these bright colors? What would it be connoting? What idea is being celebrated in the image too? I think of something like exploration and freedom, that we experience, especially like as children when we're exploring our surroundings, right? And also we consider things like how notation or like surface level meaning, um, when we're analyzing and we're trying to consider like indirect suggestions, meanings of symbols and colors. And that's the connotation of it. So we're trying to move from surface level, which is denotation, to deeper level, which is connotation. And like in this case, like if we saw an illustration of, a character isolated in a dark corner, to note their physical position, but the connotation can maybe be loneliness or fear, right? So look at colors, look at composition, look at lines as we're considering this and how it sits in a larger theme, a larger message. So pretty neat, huh? How composition falls into picture books, just like in other art forms, like I imagine photography as well, and just like the class I took in cinema. And most importantly, have fun exploring picture books, right? But these are our two scholars that we're taking these ideas from, for some tips when looking at the art in picture books. So Harry Nodelman and Molly Bang. Hope it helps.